James was a calm and friendly man who lived in a quiet neighborhood. The neighborhood was full of houses that looked very neat and clean. Everyone took care of their homes, and the streets were always tidy. The neighborhood had a homeowners association, or HOA for short. The HOA was a group of people who made sure everyone followed the rules so the community stayed nice. James liked living there. He liked how peaceful it was, and he enjoyed the small trees and gardens outside the houses. James had lived in his house for many years. He had worked hard to make it comfortable. He took care of the lawn, planted flowers, and even painted the front door a bright red color that made the house look warm and welcoming. Every day, James would park his car in his driveway and walk inside his home with a smile. He liked the little things about his neighborhood, like the birds that sang in the morning and the neighbors who waved hello when they passed by. Not far from James's house lived Karen. Karen was a woman who was very strict about rules. She often watched what was happening in the neighborhood very closely. Some neighbors said she was a little bossy because she liked to tell others what to do. Karen cared a lot about the rules set by the HOA, but she sometimes made things difficult for people. She liked to make sure everyone followed her idea of how things should be done. This sometimes caused problems, but Karen did not mind because she believed she was helping the neighborhood stay perfect. One morning, James noticed something strange. When he went out to his car, he saw that Karen's car was parked in his driveway. James thought maybe she had just stopped for a moment, so he didn't say anything and went about his day. But the next day, Karen's car was there again, parked in the same spot. This time, James felt a little surprised. His driveway was his private space. It was where he parked his car every day. He wondered why Karen kept using his driveway without asking. At first, James decided to ignore it. He thought maybe Karen was visiting a friend nearby and didn't want to block the street. He hoped it would only be for a short time, but as days passed, Karen's car stayed in his driveway more often. Sometimes it was there all day long. Why James found it harder to park his own car. His driveway was small, and with Karen's car there was no room for his car. This made James feel frustrated. He liked to keep calm, but this was becoming a problem. James tried to think about what to do. He didn't want to start a fight. He was a peaceful man who believed in talking first. One afternoon, when Karen came outside, James politely walked over to her. He smiled and said, "Hi, Karen, I noticed your car has been in my driveway a lot. I don't mind if you need a place to park, but this is my private driveway, and I need to use it every day. Could you please park somewhere else?" Karen looked at James with a serious face. She replied, "I don't see why it's a problem. The street is narrow, and sometimes I don't find a good spot. Your driveway is right there, so I thought it was okay." James nodded and said softly, "I understand parking can be hard here, but the driveway is part of my property. Hope you can respect that." Karen did not say much after that and walked away quickly. James hoped the problem would end. But Karen's car returned to his driveway the very next day. This made James sad because he had tried to solve the problem nicely. He did not want trouble, but he wanted his space to be respected. Meanwhile, some neighbors began to notice what was happening. Some of them talked quietly about Karen parking in James's driveway. They knew Karen could be difficult, and they worried the problem might get worse. But many were afraid to get involved because Karen was known to argue with anyone who challenged her. The HOA was also aware of the situation. They had rules about parking. Driveways were private property, and no one was supposed to park there. Without permission, the HOA sent a few letters to Karen asking her to stop parking in James's driveway. But Karen ignored these letters. She felt the rules were not fair to her because parking was tight in the neighborhood. James felt alone. In this struggle, he kept trying to be patient. He told himself to stay calm and not to get angry. Every day he hoped Karen would finally respect his driveway. But the problem continued, and James's frustration grew. Still, he believed in solving problems with kindness. He thought maybe, with time, Karen would change. One morning, James sat on his porch with a cup of coffee. He looked at his driveway, empty for once. It was a small victory. He thought about how much respect means in a community. He hoped that one day all neighbors could live peacefully without misunderstandings. He knew standing up for himself was important, but he wanted to do it in a way that would keep the neighborhood friendly. That day marked the calm before the storm. James did not know that soon things would change. The quiet neighborhood was about to face a challenge that would test patience, respect, and the meaning of community. But for now, James held on to hope. He believed that even difficult problems could be solved with calm and kindness. James had hoped the problem with Karen parking in his driveway would end after he spoke to her kindly. But as days passed, the situation got worse instead of better. Karen kept parking in his driveway again and again. It seemed like she did not care about his polite requests or the HOA's letters. This made James feel frustrated and tired. He wanted to find a way to fix the problem, but he also wanted to avoid fighting or making enemies in the neighborhood. At first, James tried to understand Karen's side. He knew parking in the neighborhood was hard. Streets were narrow, and many people had cars. Sometimes it was difficult to find a good place to park near your house. He thought maybe Karen was only trying to solve her own parking problem. But he also knew that using someone else's driveway without permission was not right. It was his private property. He needed to use it every day. James started to keep a careful record of when Karen's car was in his driveway. He took photos and wrote down dates and times. He hoped this information would help if he needed to explain the problem to the HOA or the police. He was careful not to do anything wrong himself. He wanted to show that he was calm and reasonable, not someone who was causing trouble. The neighbors began to notice the problem more clearly. Some of them quietly talked about what was happening. They saw Karen parking in James's driveway and knew it was causing tension. A few neighbors told James that they understood how he felt. They said it was important to stand up for your rights, especially when someone ignores the rules. But others were afraid to speak up because Karen had a strong personality. She was known to be quick to argue and sometimes rude to people who disagreed with her. The HOA was still involved but was slow to act. They sent Karen a few more warning letters, but she did not listen. She wrote back to the HOA saying that the parking rules were unfair and that she needed to use James's driveway to park her car. The HOA told her to stop, but Karen ignored them. The letters did not solve the problem. James felt like he was caught in the middle with little help. One afternoon, James went to the HOA meeting. He wanted to tell the group how hard the parking problem was for him. At the meeting, he explained calmly and clearly. He showed the photos he had taken and the notes he had kept. He said that Karen was not respecting his property and that the situation was making him feel upset. The HOA members listened carefully. Some of them nodded and agreed that the problem needed to be fixed. After the meeting, a few neighbors came to James and thanked him for speaking up. They said it was hard to stand up to Karen, but James did it with respect and patience. Made James feel a little better. He was not alone. Still, Karen's behavior did not change. Her car kept appearing in his driveway without permission. One day, James came home from work and found Karen's car blocking his driveway again. This time, he felt angry inside, but he took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm. Knocked on Karen's door and politely asked her to move her car. Karen answered and said, "Why do you make such a big deal about this? It's only parking." James explained again that it was his property and that he needed to park his car there every day. He said he was trying to be patient, but that this was becoming too much. Karen raised her voice and told him to mind his own business. James realized that talking to her was not helping anymore. Feeling upset, James went back inside his house and thought carefully about what to do next. He did not want to fight, but he also did not want to lose his space. He began to search online for advice about parking rules and what rights homeowners had when someone parked on their property without permission. He found articles in community forums where people shared similar problems and solutions. James learned that in many places, if someone parks on your private property without your permission, you can call a towing company to remove the car. However, there were rules to follow. You had to notify the HOA and sometimes the police before towing. James also found out that some HOAs had contracts with towing companies for quick enforcement. This information gave James hope. Maybe there was a way to solve the problem without arguing or waiting for Karen to listen. Meanwhile, Karen's parking habit was becoming a bigger topic in the neighborhood. Some neighbors whispered about how Karen was ignoring the rules and making others unhappy. But Karen was confident and did not care about the gossip. She believed she was right and that the neighborhood should understand her needs. This attitude made the problem grow bigger. James felt a mix of emotions. He was sad that the neighborhood was no longer peaceful. He worried about how the conflict could affect friendships and the community spirit. At the same time, he knew he had to stand up for himself. He was not going to let someone take away his rights without a fight. But James wanted to keep his dignity and find a solution that was fair and peaceful. One evening, James sat in his living room and talked to his close friend Michael. Michael listened carefully and said, "James, you have been very patient. Sometimes, when people don't respect kindness, you have to take stronger action. I think you should tell the HOA you are ready to have Karen's car towed if she parks in your driveway again. We'll show her you mean business." James thought about Michael's advice. He was nervous about what might happen. What if Karen got angry? What if the neighborhood split into sides? But he also felt a new sense of strength. Maybe it was time to take control of the situation. The next day, James contacted the HOA again. He told them about his plans and asked what he needed to do to arrange for towing if Karen parked in his driveway again. The HOA responded with instructions and said they would support him if he followed the rules. James felt relieved to have official help now. James was ready for the next step. He hoped Karen would listen and respect his space. But he also knew he had to be ready if she did not. The small neighborhood was about to see a test of patience, respect, and standing up for one's rights. James had been very patient for many months. He had tried to solve the problem with Karen's car in his driveway by talking to her kindly. He had also worked with the HOA to send warnings and get support. But Karen did not change. She kept parking in his driveway as if it was her right. James knew he had to do something different now. He could not keep waiting or hoping for a peaceful end. One morning, James saw Karen's car again in his driveway. He took a deep breath and made a decision. He called the towing company that the HOA recommended. He explained the situation and said that Karen's car was parked without permission on his private property. The towing company told James that they would come and tow the car as soon as they could. While waiting for the towing company, James went to Karen's door to let her know what was happening. He spoke to her calmly and said, "Karen, I've asked you many times not to park in my driveway. The HOA has sent you letters too. Since you did not listen, I had to call the towing company. They will remove your car soon." Karen was shocked and angry. She shouted, "You can't do this. This is my car. I need to park here. You are ruining my day." But James stayed calm. He did not answer her angry words. He simply said, "I am sorry it has come to this, but I must protect my property." The towing company arrived a short time later. They carefully hooked Karen's car and towed it away. James watched quietly, feeling both relief and sadness. Relief because his driveway was free. Sadness because he wished things had been different. After, the tow Karen went to the HOA to complain. She said James was being unfair and harsh. She told the HOA that she had reasons for parking there and that James was too strict. The HOA listened to her, but reminded Karen of the rules. They said parking in someone else's driveway without permission was not allowed. They supported James's actions because he followed the correct steps. News about the towing spread in the neighborhood. Some neighbors were surprised. They thought James was brave for standing up for himself. Others worried about the conflict and hoped it would not get worse. The community was divided. Some felt Karen was too stubborn, and others thought James had gone too far. James kept his calm, did not want to argue or fight. He only wanted to live peacefully in his home. But he also knew he had to be ready. He had learned that Karen might return and park in his driveway again. A few weeks later, James's fears came true. One afternoon after work, James came home and saw Karen's car back in his driveway. He felt a flash of anger but reminded himself. To stay calm, he took a photo to keep a record. Then he called the towing company again. This time Karen was even more upset. When she saw her car being towed again, she shouted at James, "You are ruining my life. How can you do this twice? I'll take this to court." But James did not respond. He knew anger would not help. He stayed quiet and let the towing company do their work. The second towing made the situation clearer to the HOA and neighbors. Some neighbors began to speak openly about how Karen's behavior was causing problems. They admired James for handling the situation calmly and by the rules. The HOA took the matter more seriously and warned Karen that if she continued, she could face fines or other penalties. James felt a mix of emotions. He was happy to have his driveway free again, but he did not like the conflict. He missed the peace that was once in the neighborhood. He worried about how this fight could affect the community's friendships. Even with the conflict, James stayed focused on what was right. He wanted respect and fairness. He believed that everyone in the neighborhood should follow the same rules. No one should take someone else's property without permission. Karen, however, felt isolated. She was angry at James and the HOA. She believed she was being treated unfairly. She began to avoid talking to neighbors and stayed more inside her house. The conflict changed her too. As time passed, the neighborhood started to heal. The HOA worked to enforce the rules more clearly. They reminded all residents about respecting property and parking laws. The neighbors talked more about kindness and respect. Some reached out to Karen to try to mend fences, but she was not ready. James learned many lessons from the experience. He learned the importance of standing up for his rights calmly and clearly. He learned that sometimes, to protect yourself, you have to take difficult steps. But he also learned that peace and respect were the true goals. One evening, James sat on his porch again. He looked at his empty driveway and thought about how far things had come. He was proud that he stayed kind and patient even when it was hard. He hoped that the neighborhood could move past this conflict and be a better place for everyone. The story of James and Karen became a quiet reminder in the neighborhood about respect and fairness, which showed that problems could be solved with calmness and clear action. James's story inspired others to stand up for what is right, but always with kindness. James felt a mixture of relief and nervousness after the second time Karen's car was towed from his driveway. The driveway was finally free for him to use, and the situation seemed to be moving toward a solution. But James also knew Karen was not happy, and he worried that the conflict might grow worse. Still, he decided to keep calm and do what was right. After the second tow, the HOA stepped in more strongly. They called a meeting to discuss the parking problems and the ongoing conflict. Between James and Karen, at the meeting, the HOA leaders explained the parking rules again. They reminded everyone that driveways are private property and that no one should park in someone else's driveway without permission. The HOA said that from now on they would enforce the rules more strictly. This included arranging for cars to be towed quickly if people broke the rules. Some neighbors attended the meeting and spoke up. Many said they supported James because he followed the proper steps and acted calmly. Others said they hoped Karen would understand and respect the rules. But a few neighbors felt sorry for Karen. They said parking was difficult in the neighborhood and wished there was a better solution for everyone. Karen did not attend the meeting. She was angry and upset. She felt unfairly treated by the HOA and the neighbors. She continued to park her car in James's driveway when no one was watching. But now, with the HOA watching closely, she knew she could get her car towed again. Karen's anger made her more distant from the community. She stopped talking to most neighbors and stayed inside her home more often. James wanted to find a way to calm things down, did not like the fighting or the sadness it brought to the neighborhood. One day he decided to write a letter to Karen. In the letter, he thanked her for being his neighbor and said he hoped they could find peace. He explained again that his driveway was private and that he needed to use it every day. He asked kindly if she could park elsewhere to avoid more problems. James put the letter in Karen's mailbox. He hoped she would read it and feel that he was trying to be friendly. But days passed, and Karen did not reply. She did not speak to James, and the parking problem continued. Sometimes, she parked her car close to his driveway, but not inside. Other times, she still used the driveway when no one was around. Because of this, James stayed ready. He kept his phone near him in case he needed to call the towing company again. He did not want to cause more fights, but he wanted to protect his property. At the same time, he tried not to let the situation take over his life. He focused on his work, his family, and the things that made him happy. Neighbors noticed how James handled the problem. They saw he was patient and respectful, even when things were hard. Some neighbors began to speak more openly about the importance of kindness and respect. They said that problems between neighbors could happen, but it was how people handled them that mattered most. Slowly, the neighborhood began to heal. The HOA worked to make parking easier for everyone. They looked for ways to add more parking spaces and suggested sharing ideas with the city. The community came together to find solutions instead of just blaming each other. James felt hopeful. He knew that the problem with Karen was not solved perfectly, but the neighborhood was moving in a better direction. He believed that respect and clear communication were the keys to living peacefully with others. He also understood that sometimes standing firm was necessary to protect what was yours. One evening, James sat on his porch again, watching the sun set. The driveway was empty, and the street was quiet. He thought about how important it was to stay calm and kind, even when others were difficult. He hoped that Karen would one day see his kindness and maybe change her ways. But no matter what happened, James was proud of how he handled the situation. Dignity and respect. This part of the story shows how important it is to balance standing up for yourself with trying to keep peace. It reminds us that neighbors are people with feelings, and sometimes conflicts need patience and time to heal. James's actions became a quiet lesson in the neighborhood about strength, kindness, and fairness. After many months of tension and struggle, the neighborhood slowly began to find peace again. James continued living in his home with patience and hope. The driveway was finally free for him to park his car without worry. He felt proud of standing up for his rights without losing his calm or kindness. Karen, too, had changed in her own way. The conflict had been hard on her. She had become quieter and less involved with the neighbors, though she still sometimes parked near James's driveway. She no longer used it without permission. The repeated towing had shown her that boundaries must be respected, even if parking was difficult. The HOA worked harder to improve the community. They held more meetings and listened to everyone's concerns. They talked with the city about adding more parking spaces and fixing narrow streets. The HOA made clear rules about parking and reminded residents to respect their neighbors' property. This helped reduce conflicts and made the neighborhood more peaceful. Neighbors began to understand each other better. They saw how important it was to communicate clearly and treat others with respect. The story of James and Karen became an example. People talked about how James stayed calm and kind, even when faced with a hard situation. They admired his patience and how he did not lose his dignity. James reflected on the experience often. He thought about how much he had learned. He realized that sometimes standing up for yourself is necessary, but it can be done with respect and kindness. He believed that true strength comes from patience and peaceful action, not anger or fighting. He also understood that every person has their own struggles. Karen's actions were difficult, but he hoped she found peace too. He wished that everyone in the neighborhood could live together in harmony, respecting each other's space and feelings. One day, James decided to share his story with the community. At a neighborhood meeting, he spoke softly but clearly about what had happened. He told how the problem started, how he tried to solve it with kindness, and how he had to take stronger steps to protect his home. He spoke about patience, respect, and fairness. The neighbors listened carefully. Some nodded in agreement. Others smiled, thankful for James's honesty. His story helped everyone see that problems could be solved without anger or hurt feelings. It was a lesson about respect, dignity, and peaceful strength. From that day, the neighborhood felt closer. People helped each other more and spoke kindly, even when they disagreed. The story of James and Karen was a reminder that respect for others and clear communication were the best ways to live together happily. James continued to enjoy/condate, condares. He tended his garden, greeted neighbors with a smile, and felt proud of how he handled a difficult problem. His patience and kindness had helped bring peace, and his story inspired others to stand up for themselves while staying calm and respectful. The neighborhood. Learned an important truth. Respect and kindness are the foundation of a strong community. And even when challenges come, peaceful action and understanding can help everyone live better lives.